A very good morning to all our guests, both present here and joining us virtually. It's our privilege to welcome you to the 24th edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit, hosted annually by the Energy and Resource Institute, TERI. As we commence today's proceedings, we kindly request all attendees to take their seats and ensure that their mobile devices are set to silent mode to maintain the decorum of the session. Before we begin, I would like to inform our guests and audience today of the fire and safety protocols for the Stein Auditorium. TERI is a health, safety, and environment certified organization. In case of any untoward incident, like fire evacuation is required, you're required to exit from the auditorium through the fire exit gate nearest to you without any panic. There are 7 exit gates for this auditorium, 4 on the ground floor, right, left, and 2 main entrances. There is 1 exit in the stage and 2 exits in the balcony, which are also the entrances to the balcony. In case of fire, the fire marshals will take their position in the aisles and exit gates to help you evacuate. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and esteemed panelists, on behalf of my colleagues at TERI, I, Sheen Pandita, extend a warm welcome to you all on the panel discussion on building infrastructure for a resilience dividend. This session aims to explore strategies for integrating resilience into infrastructure development, focusing on unlocking the resilience dividend to ensure sustainable growth, equity, and climate adaptation. We initiate today's session by announcing the addition of another invaluable partnership for TERI with Container Corporation of India Limited, CONCOR. Representing CONCOR, we have Shri Sanjay Swaroop, Chairman and Managing Director, Shri Ajit Kumar Panda, Director Project and Services, Shri Ahmed Wasi Khan, Group General Manager, Project and Services. I'd request the signatories from CONCOR to please join us on the stage for signing of the document. Additionally, I request Mr. Sanjay Seth, Senior Director at TERI, to kindly join the stage for the signing of the ceremony. Can we please have a round of applause for them? I also request our Director General, Dr. Vibha, to please join us on the stage. While the signing formalities are underway, allow me to provide a brief overview of CONCOR and this collaboration. CONCOR, a public sector enterprise under the Ministry of Railways is India's leading provider of cost-effective and reliable logistics solutions. With a vast network of 66 ICDs, CFS, CONCOR has grown from its humble beginnings to become a market leader in containerized transportation. Beyond rail logistics, it manages ports, air cargo, complexes, and cold chain infrastructure, playing a pivotal role in promoting containerization. Through its modern rail wagon fleet, customer-centric policies, and advanced IT integration, CONCOR continues to enhance multimodal logistics support for India international and domestic trade. I also request Shri Prakash Sir, Distinguished Fellow, to please join us on the stage for the signing. Dr. Vibha Dhawan, our Director General, under whose leadership we achieved a new partnership, and Distinguished Fellow Shri Prakash Sir, who has been the guiding light and pivotal in establishing this center. TERI and CONCOR have signed an MOU to establish the CONCOR TERI Center for Excellence for Green and Sustainable Logistics, aiming to support Indian Railways' commitment to net zero emissions by 2030 and increase rail freight share as per National Rail Plan. The center will drive research and develop solutions for sustainable logistics, focusing on areas such as enabling modal shift to clean technology, vehicles, warehouse efficiency, terminal operations, and renewable energy integration, carbon credit trading, and multimodal transport. Now I request our signatories to please take up the podium for the signatures. Can we please have a round of applause? I request all our guests on the stage to commemorate the event with a group photo. Director CONCOR to deliver a few words to mark this partnership.
Dignitaries on the dais, ladies and gentlemen, it's a remarkable day that CONCOR and TERI have joined hands today for working towards green and sustainable logistics. We in CONCOR are doing our bit to fulfill the ESG norms and work towards green logistics. 95% of our transportation is through rail. Last year we have transported around 52 million tons of containerized cargo in the country, and we are using rail as primary mode of transport. Apart from that, we have deployed LNG trailers for the first time in the country. We are working with electric vehicles suppliers also, and a lot of research is going on for battery technology. In 3 years' time, we are very sure that we will be getting 500 kilometers lead distance of travel in one charge of the battery. That will fulfill our requirement for first mile, last mile using electric vehicles. So, but on a trial basis for transportation within our terminal, we have already given order for 2 electric vehicles, and once the trials are completed and the research in battery technology is also going on simultaneously, in 3 years' time, we will be able to induct a lot more electric vehicles in our fleet for first mile, last mile transportation. Apart from that, we are using solar panel for lighting at our terminals and some of the offices. We are also constructing first net zero warehouse in the country at Shri Perambuduru facility, and that's a huge warehouse, 130,000 square feet, in which we are using the services of TERI for consultancy. This will be the landmark building in our country. First time in the country it will be done. So once it is successful, we will replicate it at other places also. So partnership with TERI, I am very sure will be very enriching for both of us. We are doing whatever is possible in the industry. Now we will get the support of institutions like TERI, which is a pioneering institute as far as green and sustainability is concerned. I wish all the success to this partnership, and I am very sure both of us will benefit. Ultimately, nation as a whole will benefit from this partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I now request Sanjay sir to address the audience for today's partnership.
Morning, everyone, and very excited to be here on this momentous occasion where we, TERI and CONCOR, have inked something which has been, waited for too long. And heartiest congratulations to the CONCOR and TERI teams for putting this agreement together, the MOU coming together for creating a center of excellence for green and sustainable logistics. Let's have a round of applause for them. I think this is a momentous occasion, and we really have been, CONCOR at the forefront of freight movement in the country. Nothing can be better than that. TERI coming together with such a prestigious organization to take sustainability to the forefronts of logistic movements. Transition to sustainable logistics could be cost effective as well as environment friendly. I also heard the CMD talk about the largest warehousing that they are putting together. which is also going to be walking the talk as far as sustainability is concerned. And my own division at TERI, the Sustainable Buildings Program, will make sure that we turn it into a green and sustainable infrastructure. And after we've done that, sir, we will go one step further. We will also rate it under the GRIA rating system to become a 5-star rated warehouse project. The CONCOR TERI Center of Excellence for Green and Sustainable Logistics, as the CMD said, is not just a collaboration between two organizations, but it is a platform that will generate research-driven solutions to benefit the entire logistics sector, industry stakeholders, and policymakers in shaping a more sustainable future. This is also an effort in contributing towards India's vision under the National Logistics Policy of reducing the logistic costs from 14% to 8% of the GDP by 2047, the time that India aspires to be Viksit Bharat. We thank CONCOR for their trust and confidence that they have reposed in TERI's brand and expertise, and we look forward to working together to make impactful contributions towards a greener, more resilient logistics sector in India. I thank you for this on this occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. With that, we conclude the signing ceremony for today. We now transition to a highly anticipated panel discussion. I request our guests on the dais to join us in the audience for the session today. I am now honored to invite our distinguished panelists to the stage. The moderator for today's session is Ms. Teena Jha, renowned journalist, Sansad Television. Today, she'll be in discussion with Mr. Amit Prothi, Director General, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, Dr. Madhav Bahadur Karki, Expert Member, Environment Protection and Climate Change Council, Government of Nepal, Mr. Shekhar Singh, Municipal Commissioner, Pimpri Chinchwad Municipal Corporation, Mr. Santhosh Muzumdar, Director, Government Relations and Sustainability, Johnson Controls, Mr. Shawik Ganguly, Senior Advisor, Infrastructure and Climate Finance, FCDO, British High Commission, New Delhi, Mr. Sanjay Seth, Senior Fellow and Senior Director, TERI, Vice President cum CEO, Griha Council, Ms. Shabnam Bassi, Deputy CEO, Griha Council and Director TERI. Can we please have a round of applause to welcome them on the stage? I now heed the floor to Ms. Teena Jha for moderating today's session.
Hello, am I audible? Namaskar, good morning to all our distinguished speakers and members in the audience. I am Teena, and I'm delighted to be here today to moderate this very important session on building a resilient infrastructure, because that's vital for a sustainable future. But to begin with, and at the outset, I would like to congratulate TERI first for its continued leadership in not just promoting, but also accelerating sustainability efforts. If I'm not wrong, it's the 24th edition. For 24 years, they've been providing a unique platform to world leaders, global thinkers, to come together, discuss the pressing challenges, and also discuss solutions towards making this world and giving us a more secure, equitable, and sustainable future. So thank you very much to TERI for this wonderful event as well, and for inviting me to moderate this session. You've been introduced to our distinguished speakers. It is my special privilege once again to have them on the stage. Before we begin the session, I would just make two requests to our speakers. Looking at the number of panelists that we have, let's stick to 2 rounds of questions. In the first one, we'll try and lay out the challenges that we face in terms of building a resilient infrastructure globally. We can talk about various efforts that are being made at the organizational levels, at individual levels. And in the second round, perhaps you can have more interventions, looking at the flow of the discussion if you want to add on, make some important points, and talk about the need to scale efforts through partnerships, because that's crucial. Collective action is something that will take us on the path to a sustainable future. So we'll look forward to this discussion. I'll request all our speakers to try and complete your answers in a time of 5 minutes. And it will be wonderful to have, to engage with the audience as well, because at the end of the day, they will have great questions to ask, something that, you know, perhaps I will have missed in the discussion, and then the floor will be open to answers as well. But before I throw in the first question, let me set the context of the discussion on why we need resilient infrastructure. What are the kind of efforts that are being made? But you're all aware, we are falling short of meeting several targets. How are we faring on this front is something that I'll quote some numbers, the estimates that has been provided by the CDRI. We have Mr. Amit Prothi from the CDRI. They released the first biennial report on global resilience in infrastructure back in 2023, and they put out some estimates, the stark numbers that you should know about. You're all aware, the current population of the world is about 8 billion. In the next 25 years, that is by 2050, the global population will touch 10 billion. But what's worrying is 90% of the infrastructure that we will need by then, in the next 2 decades, is yet to be built. Without resilience, the world risks stranded assets, also escalating disasters. In the face of climate change, we've already begun to witness the scale and the frequency of climate change events and the impact that it is having on all of us. According to this infrastructure resilience report, disasters cost over $700 billion annually in damages, with low and middle income countries bearing 54% of the impact, despite holding only a third of the global infrastructure value. And these countries also face chronic underinvestment, and up to 85% of infrastructure spending is on repairs rather than resilient development. So I'm going to start the discussion by understanding first the resilience challenge. Don't mind me asking questions randomly, but to you, Mr. Prothi, because I quoted some estimates from the CDRI report, help us and the members in the audience understand how serious this challenge is, because we know infrastructure is critical for economic and social development. It's also critical to achieve a number of the sustainable development goals. But when we say 90% of the infrastructure that we will need in the next 25 years is yet to be built, how worrying is that situation? So 3 parts to the question that I'm going to ask you. An overview of the challenges that we face in global resilience infrastructure. What is the CDRI, which is, we know it's a global body which was set up on the initiative of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So in the little time that you've had, what are the kind of efforts that you have put in to address the challenges that we face, particularly in the low and middle income countries? And the third part, you can help us understand the resilience dividend. That is central to the report. So what does that mean, and how are we making sure that this aspect is understood globally?
Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all, and I really like coming to this audience, because sometimes I feel I don't need to explain what I'm talking about, people already get it. But yet, I think there is a nuance to when we talk about resilience that is still not very well understood. So I think maybe I'll start with your third question on the resilience dividend aspect. And I'll start with just quoting an article I was reading last week in CNN. I think a lot of us get our information from the news. This is not a low-income country, this is the US, but let me just read, the headline is stretch of I-40, which is one of the main highways, reopens in North Carolina, marking a milestone in post-Helene recovery. 5 months after Hurricane Helene severed a critical Appalachian freight corridor, a 12-mile stretch of Interstate 40 through North Carolina's Pigeon River Gorge reopened on Saturday. So after 5 months, this highway is opening. Reopening that stretch restores a vital freight corridor that supports both regional industries and national supply chains. Before Hurricane Helene washed out a 4-mile stretch of I-40 that connected North Carolina and Tennessee, this section served as a trucking route linking East Coast ports to Midwestern hubs. Its closure disrupted shipments of everything from auto parts to produce from Tennessee while stranding tourists, blah, 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 hospitality industry, which generates over $2 billion, right? So why am I reading this news article? Because every day when we are opening our newspapers or we're seeing there is an impact that a flood or a cyclone or an earthquake is causing. There is an impact, and that impact is often felt in infrastructure because the infrastructure either gets flooded or disrupted, and there's an economic impact to it, to all. So we just had a wonderful signing just now. It's amazing that we're talking about transportation, building the biggest warehouse, but yet the goods in that warehouse will need to be transported, and that relies on the road infrastructure. And if the road infrastructure gets flooded, that good shipment will not happen as efficiently as we would have wanted it to. So when we talk about resilience dividend, what we are doing as CDRI, so the second question, what is CDRI? We are an international organization headquartered in India. We are a coalition of countries that have agreed to focus on how do you build infrastructure or in your infrastructure space. It's under India's leadership. We now have 41 countries who have agreed to this coalition, so we have 41 members, and we also have 7 international organizations, such as the ADB World Bank, who are part of this coalition. Our focus is very simple. We are really saying we are building infrastructure, we are upgrading infrastructure, we are investing a lot in infrastructure. It's not necessarily that it's about the money. So that is a different conversation. There is a need for money, but there is also money being spent. How do we make sure that that money is spent in a way where we have understood these risks that are emanating because of climate change is exacerbating some of these risks, but there are other risks that they may not be climate change related, but they exist and we've not factored them in our decision making. So as an organization, we are saying, can we build capacity in this space? Can we train our professionals who are putting those DPRs together to actually understand, how is it that my road or my railroad or my airport or my seaport or my power system, how will that function in the future, given that there might be certain uncertainties related to more flooding, cyclones, etc. So how do you make that connection? And that comes back to capacity building as a key gap that we're trying to address. The second aspect there is data. 10 years ago, we didn't have the kind of data we have today. 10 years ago, we didn't have the modeling capabilities we have today. So how do we bring out tools and methods that makes it easier, I'm not going to say easy, easier to really start to embed this information of risk into our decision making? And the third one translates, like, how do you make all of this a standardized approach? How do your standards start to reflect a better need for risk assessments, a better need for data, a much more nuanced understanding of why, how do you make that infrastructure in a way that it is not getting flooded? And I'll give you some examples. We are working with the Department of Economic Affairs. We looked at the National Infrastructure Pipeline. We've picked a few projects and said, okay, there's a project, a highway project in the Assam corridor that gets flooded. Now, if you invest in more embankments and much more sophisticated drainage, there's a cost. That cost may be about 65 crores. I mean, there's a real project there, 65 crores. But the returns, because your disrupted services are actually not going to get disrupted. So returns over the lifetime of that infrastructure actually will give you 12 times what you've invested. And that is the dividend part. The avoided losses, because you have invested upfront in enhancing your infrastructure in a way where it is then not getting disrupted, that's your dividend for paying more attention to resilience. Let me stop there.
Okay, before we proceed further, there's a video message from Ms. Josefina Belmont. She's mayor of Quezon City in the Philippines. She was named the 2023 Champion of the Earth for Policy Leadership, which is one of the United Nations' highest environmental honors. So let's listen in to what she has to say.
Urban governance is evolving. Cities are no longer just policy implementers. We are shaping the future of sustainability and climate resilience. As first responders to urban challenges, we are uniquely positioned to bridge global sustainability goals with local realities, ensuring that climate action and SDG implementation are both effective and inclusive. But we know that overcoming these challenges is more than just about having policies. It's about collaboration. In Quezon City, we have recognized early on that the path forward requires local, inclusive, and practical climate action, where the government, businesses, and communities work together to drive real sustainable change. Our enhanced local climate change action plan serves as a strategic, evidence-based roadmap towards climate justice, ensuring that social equity and community engagement remain at the core, particularly for the most vulnerable. A key driver of our success has been multi-stakeholder collaboration, which has helped us advance waste management, renewable energy, sustainable mobility, and urban green spaces, among others. We view waste management as an opportunity to create economic benefits and empower communities. Our Trash to Cashback program incentivizes waste segregation and recycling, while the TARP Cycling Initiative, in partnership with local designers, repurposes election tarpaulins into reusable tote bags, providing livelihood for the women at our correctional facility. As we transition to clean energy, we are expanding solar power in city-owned facilities and schools, reducing emissions and energy costs while enhancing urban resilience. Meanwhile, our 210-kilometer bike lane network supports low-carbon transportation, improving air quality and connectivity. At the same time, our free bus program is transitioning to electric buses, making public transport more accessible, reducing congestion, and cutting emissions. While these initiatives have been successful, challenges remain. Securing sustainable funding, strengthening local capacity, and ensuring equitable distribution of climate benefits are critical in sustaining these efforts. To address these gaps, we are actively engaging with global networks like the C40 Cities, Resilient Cities Network, and CityNet, who provide technical assistance, capacity building, and knowledge sharing to enhance our climate solutions. This reinforces the essential role of international organizations, civil society organizations, and national governments in scaling SDG implementation and climate action. Strengthening partnerships, capacity building, and resource sharing mechanisms at the national level is imperative to ensuring that all cities, regardless of size or capacity, have the tools to implement effective sustainability reforms. The bottom line, no ambition is impossible if we work together. Through our collective action, we can achieve the SDGs and build cities that are livable, inclusive, and prepared for the challenges ahead. Thank you, and may we continue to engage in these difficult but necessary conversations, and more importantly, turn them into transformative progress toward a more just, sustainable, and resilient world. And as we say in Filipino, mabuhay tayong lahat.
So, through her works, Ms. Josefina Belmont has exemplified that when cities begin to change, the change happens rapidly. There's one city which is changing rapidly in India as well. We have the Municipal Commissioner, Mr. Shekhar Singh. He will talk about the kind of approach that the Municipal Commissioners have adopted in bringing about this kind of change. But that will come to just a little later. There's another video that the organizing team wants us to have a look at to better understand the gravity of the problem and the immediate solutions needed to address.
By 2050, the global population will reach 10 billion, and over 90% of the infrastructure we will need has yet to be built. Without resilience, we risk stranded assets and escalating disasters. The stakes are high. The world faces an infrastructure crisis that threatens lives, economies, and essential services. Disasters already cost over $700 billion annually in damages. Lows and middle-income countries, which bear 54% of the impact despite holding only a third of global infrastructure value, face chronic underinvestment. Up to 85% of infrastructure spending in these regions is on repairs, not resilient development. But resilience transforms vulnerability into opportunity. Nature-based infrastructure solutions like mangroves and wetlands can protect at nearly half the cost of traditional infrastructure while enhancing biodiversity and water quality. Despite their potential, nature-based infrastructure solutions account for just 0.3% of global infrastructure spending. It's time to reframe resilience as an economic opportunity for sustainable growth, equity, and climate adaptation. This session will explore critical questions. How can we integrate resilience into global infrastructure investments? What policies and partnerships can unlock the resilience dividend for vulnerable regions? By investing in resilience, we can break the cycle of vulnerability, safeguard economies, and build infrastructure that supports sustainable growth and climate adaptation. Together, let's turn resilience into opportunity and build the infrastructure of tomorrow. The future depends on the decisions we make today. Join us to explore strategies that will shape a resilient and equitable future.
Okay, Mr. Singh, we'll give you some more time to recollect your thoughts. There's so much that you can talk to us about, I'm sure. Dr. Madhav Karki, I'll first come to you because where Mr. Prothi left at is we were trying to understand the specific country-specific challenges, and especially in context of the low and middle-income countries. So in that sense, because the burden of impact, both in terms of financing, also the kind of climate change impact that we are seeing in countries like Nepal and India, infrastructure resilience is critical to both of us and other countries in the global south as well. To Nepal, particularly in context of the geographical terrain, and also because of your vulnerabilities to natural disasters and also the climate change risks. Talk to us about these challenges, but at the same time, also share with our members in the audience how Nepal is turning these vulnerabilities into opportunities, into resilience, which is required for future.
Thank you for the opportunity. Good morning, everyone. I think the question on how to convert vulnerability into opportunity is very appropriate for Nepal. Nepal, as all of you know, is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. It is on the forefront of climate change impacts. Our glaciers are melting, and we have more frequent hydrological disasters. Just during the last 4 years, as our Honorable Minister yesterday shared, close to $1 billion worth of damage, economic loss was suffered by Nepal. So we have multi-dimensional vulnerability, which means we have biophysical vulnerability, we have socioeconomic vulnerability, and we have, of course, the climate vulnerability. So to convert the multidimensional vulnerability into opportunity, I think this concept of resilient dividend is very, very pertinent, very important. And my understanding of resilience dividend is we convert vulnerability into opportunity with the aim of really reaping multiple dividends. So it means at least triple dividends. Which means you have to reduce the damage, so you have to reduce the cost of damage. And second, you have to reduce, you have to generate economic opportunity. And third, of course, it has to benefit environment and society. So With that concept, Nepal, of course, being a mountain country, as you mentioned, for us, the infrastructure, especially the transport infrastructure, the road infrastructure, drinking water infrastructure, and then the hydroelectrical infrastructure are very important. As you saw last year, during the last 2 years, even in India, a lot of hydroelectric projects were damaged. So similar experience has also been, we also had similar experiences. So I would say to convert the opportunity, we have many challenges. First, we have to identify the challenges. What are those challenges? First of all, being one of the least developed country, Nepal faces, I would say, the financial challenge is the most important, because there is always, when you invest in resilience dividend, there is a high upfront cost. And of course, there is limited access to concessional finance for Nepal. Nepal depends on the external finance. And also the mindset that you don't worry about future, you rather have a short-term goals. And the second is, of course, we also have these policy, institutional, and governance challenges. Our institutions are not very, I would say, not working. These days, we have to work in a whole society, whole government approach. And our government, as in most of South Asia, they work on silo approach, sectoral approach. So this multi-sector approach is lacking. And also, when we need investment, you have public investment and you have private investment. While the public investment is drying up, so the private investment is very important. But for the private investor, this de-risking or cushioning their risk is an important factor to invest. And we need incentives. We need a regulatory mechanism which is incentive oriented. So the third and the fourth one is, of course, we have technological and data gap, which means to invest in resilience dividend, you have to have good climate models, you have to have good projections, you have to also, because if you take the Green Climate Fund, they first of all ask you, if you are asking for fund, what is your rationale? What is your climate rationale? So you have to define that based on science, and that is lacking. And then we also have other two gaps. We are a democratic country, and so our political representatives, they have very limited 5-year, I would say, horizon, and they think of how do I win the next election. So they will not invest for a long-term, resilience means it's a long-term investment. And then that mindset we have to remove by having, I think, more awareness raising, by interacting, engaging with the political class. So that, I think, is common in India also, in other countries also. And the last one, of course, we have what we call the international, we have, of course, Nepal is highly dependent on the international support for its climate change, adaptation, mitigation, disaster risk reduction. But as you know, the donors are not really coordinated. There are fragmentation in the projects they fund. So if you don't really consolidate all the funds together, you will not get the resilience dividend, because resilience dividends weaves together issue of social equity. It has economic aspects. How do we improve the livelihood? And it also has the environmental aspect, because we will later talk about how do we overcome these challenges. And this environmental, I would say, the benefits come a little bit later. So how do we sort of really harmonize between the environment and development tensions? So this tension has to go away, and we need to do some harmonization. So these, I think, are multiple challenges which Nepal faces. But they are opportunities, because we see that very biodiversity rich country, very tourism, nature-based tourism rich potentials. I think if we make the decision right, And this is where I say we have to do transformative approach, that doing things differently, and to do things differently, you have to take decisions differently, which means again, different ministries have to talk together, and they have to take more, I would say, coordinated decisions. And in Nepal, we have 3 tiers of government. Provinces are there, and then we have the local governments and the central government. And these 3 governments are not well coordinated. And I think in India, you have state and center, I think, quite working together. We are just a young democracy, I would say, republic. So we are trying to learn from our neighbors, and we see that in future converting vulnerability, multidimensional vulnerability into not only opportunity, but also some, I would say, the economic opportunity, socio-economic opportunity, and of course the environmental dividends, which means that you at the end of the day, biodiversity is reached and ecosystem are conserved. Thank you very much.
Right. So you spoke about a lot of aspects which, of course, Nepal is battling, but at the same time, how you're converting these vulnerabilities into opportunities, because it said adversities create the, it lead to the best kind of innovation. We've seen that during the COVID times as well. Taking on from, where you left at in terms of the challenges, I'd like to bring in Mr. Sanjay Seth into the discussion. An important point that Dr. Karki made is about the need to change mindsets, and especially at this pivotal time that we are in. Sustainability is not an option, it's a necessity to secure our future generations. Given the plethora of challenges that India faces, we have a growing population, there's rapid urbanization, we also are equally impacted by climate change and natural disaster events. Tell us about how India is building its resiliency, and the kind of bold and immediate action. I heard you speak recently at an event. You said what India requires is bold and immediate action to integrate sustainability into urban planning. How are we doing that?
So, I think, look, it's time for action. Everything is around action, right? And we've been discussing this for far too long. And if we don't act now, then it's a missed opportunity, right? As you're seeing that currently we are at about 30% urbanization that is in our country. We have about 30% urbanization. And by 2050, 2047, we are expected to move up to about 45 to 50%. If we don't integrate the aspects of, we work on a very siloed approach, fragmented. You don't talk to each other. Like, for example, if you look at buildings, it's an integral part of a city. Mobility is an integral part of the city planning process. And if each of these are going to be looked at in isolation, which is the current way of planning, then I don't think so that we are reaching anywhere. And that's why it's more than, it's more necessary that we all get this integrated. There has to be convergence. There has to be business models around it. You have to look at it not through a lens of that what is the kind of expenditure that is being put or incurred for creating a resilient infrastructure for the future, because long-term dividends are kind of, missed out from this discussion. So it's time that we bring these back onto the table. We make sure that we do this and involve both the top-down as well as the bottoms-up. You see, largely, and I've heard this many times when we have visited state governments and we have discussed it with the principal secretaries and the chief secretaries of the state government. They say that, look, all these discussions are around or are held in rooms where the principal secretaries or the people who are at the top level, they do the discussions. And the poor people who are at the grassroots levels for implementing it have no idea as to what we are talking about, right? So how do we build up their capacities to understand what we are really talking about? Otherwise, it's a missed opportunity again. So, and that is where I think we've taken up, we are doing some excellent work in Visakhapatnam is a urban living lab. So the concepts of urban living lab, being integrated into the planning processes, where a top-down and bottoms-up approach is used. Communities are brought in to see what is required to change the fabric of their, their cities, and how would they want resilience to be integrated within their planning processes, so that knee-jerk actions are not taken. We need to be more ready for the onslaughts or the changing weather patterns that we are seeing. More and more, they are going to become even more frequent, right, as we move ahead. So how do we go about looking at it in a much more scientific manner? You talked about data. Data is something which has been completely missing, and it's only in the last couple of years that we have started giving it some importance, and yet it is still fragmented. So how do we look at all of these aspects in a much more cohesive manner, so that we would not be able to, take knee-jerk actions, as I said. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to stop there. Thank you.
Okay, we'll come back and discuss how scaling up efforts are required, because that's the need of the hour in the next round. But coming to you, Mr. Ganguly, you worked on projects in various countries in Asia, Africa, also in the Middle East. You've covered sectors like transport, energy, water, sanitation, and urban development. All of these are vital for resilient infrastructure. But according to you, because we've discussed a lot of challenges, and financing is one of the critical challenges that countries in the low and middle income region have to overcome. What are the key barriers that are preventing global infrastructure investments from prioritizing resilience, particularly in the belt that I just spoke about?
Interesting question. So I think the biggest barrier is a mental barrier. We think of resilience investments as separate from infrastructure investments. They are part of infrastructure investments. If we don't integrate resilience now, we are locking in the current level of risks for the next 30, 40 years. So, and we are all sort of guilty of using that phrasing, the phrasing that investments in resilience. That's not separate from just normal investment flows that are happening. Right now, when we see infrastructure being built, a dominant flow of investments comes through the government. So the easiest, not the easy way, but the easiest way to align these investments into resilience objectives is the first thing that we should do. So a lot of money, for example, in India, there are central government schemes that provide grants to cities for building up urban infrastructure projects. It's simpler to ask cities, as part of the condition that the money that they are getting, to use it in a way that makes their urban infrastructure more resilient. They're already getting that grant. And we have seen that happening in about 10 years back. Government of India, through Ministry of Urban Development, incentivized cities to follow service level benchmarks, improve their urban services. Why can't we use the same approach for improving resilience? If cities are able to meet resilience objectives, then they get extra incentives, or they get extra funding. So I think we have to one, stop treating private investment as a solution, but think about how to align government investment, existing flows of finance better to meet our resilience objectives. Because when we come to economic dividend of resilience, large part of the dividend the government enjoys, and a large part of the dividend is enjoyed by the users or the community. When we talk about private investment, it is very complex to structure in any transaction where private investor will want to invest in securing a risk which is contingent. The payoff that we are talking about, the payoff that Amit spoke about, the 12 times payoff, it will happen only when a flood happens. It will happen only when an earthquake happens. A private sector investor is not the right person to take over that risk. But how do we align commercial finance into achieving resilience objectives? So I spoke about public funding, but commercial is slightly different. We have to follow the money. And a lot of the money comes from financial markets, comes from banks in creating this infrastructure. Banks in India and most of the emerging economies, they don't price the climate risk in their pricing of the finance. So they don't take into consideration that the project is in a high flood zone or a high earthquake zone, and therefore I must price that risk in the interest rate that I ask from that project. If we force through regulation the banks and financial institutions to start asking for that, to start pricing that risk, then that means if a project is better resilience, incorporates better resilience in its design, then it can enjoy a slightly lower interest rate because the risk is lower. That creates a strong incentive for commercial finance to align with resilience objectives. So I'll stop here. Thanks.
DRI report, which was released in 2023, has described this situation as putting investment into a bamboo basket, because at the end nothing will be left. So the right approach is what is required going forward. A combined approach, which we've been discussing about in terms of policy, in terms of investment, is something that has been shown by the Pimpri Chinchwad Municipal Corporation, something that I spoke about earlier. Mr. Shekhar Singh is, the municipal commissioner of the city, and if there's one city in India that has, that is ready to showcase its inspiring journey of transformation, it has to be Pimpri Chinchwad leading the race today. Why I say this? Because until a few years ago, the city was battling all sorts of problems of traffic congestion, poor air quality, bad health as a result of that. But it's the kind of right approach, both in terms of policy and community engagement, which has resulted in the kind of transformation that has turned, in fact, the city into a model city. So I'll let Mr. Shekhar Singh talk about how this has happened, wherein you've turned this massive problem into a solution, because at the end what's important is every problem ought to have a solution. We just need to put the right minds together.
Thank you, Ms. Jha, for those words, but I'll dial down the appreciation a bit. I think we absolutely need to dial down even with what PCMC we're trying to do, because it's just a start of an effort that we're trying to do. Frankly, we ourselves are still quite a bit of a distance far as far as that is concerned. One of the things that is there in city administration or the local government is the grind of the local democracy. And once you move out of Stein Auditorium, and once you move back to the city, the entire grind of the local democracy, probably what Madhavji was also mentioning with regards to countries and developing economies, etc., brings you to a situation where the choice is often between trying to invest for a new developing area, trying to invest in infra which is resilient, or trying to have that markup on the cost when you consider that. One of the things that is also coming from what various things that speakers have been speaking about is also a lack of understanding of what Mr. Prothi was also mentioning about a life cycle cost. What's the life cycle cost of the infra? We currently don't consider that. Currently, if I'm building an STP, it's about building an STP. What's the per MLD cost that is there to me? But I'm not thinking about if that STP on the river bank gets flooded, if my pumps get flooded, what is the maintenance cost, etc., which your video also showed about 85%, which I feel is a bit of a overstretch, at least for cities like us. We are not spending 85% on repairs. We are spending much lesser than that, but we are spending a substantial portion. So I think this life cycle cost analysis has to come in very, very strongly. And I do agree with Mr. Seth when he said about that things can be incentivized and disincentivized. See, any particular ecosystem, specifically so a political ecosystem, understands only incentives and disincentives. Because, in long term, everyone's dead. That's the common refrain when you think about a very long-term planning from a perspective planning point of view. But if you build in incentives and disincentives, the way that he was saying, for example, the Government of India funding, I think Mr. Ganguly was saying, the Government of India funding, the government of, state government funding which comes in, it can very well be tied to a disaster resilience component in an infra. And I think Government of India has begun to do that. There's a 5% necessary component that has been put in just 3-4 years back in every scheme, for example. I think it's a 10% or 5% component which has been necessarily put in. What we are trying to do in Pimpri Chinchwad is we are trying to, and I'll say it PCMC for the lack of this thing. What we are trying to do in PCMC, first, we are trying to set up a policy imperative for us where we are trying to are beginning to analyze all our projects on sustainability parameters. So not just resilience, resilience becomes one very important big bucket of how we are analyzing, but also in terms of sustainability parameters, where that project falls in. And if it falls below a particular this thing, we tend to improve onto that. So where we move from a grey infra to a probably a nature-based infra solution, where we move from a simple STP to an STP, which is resilience in face of a flooding, water treatment plant, which is resilience in the face of the flooding, and things like that. And we are just beginning to do that. So that is why I said I like to dial down that a bit. But I think it would be one of the first attempts by a municipal corporation or city administration to try and understand and have this matrix ready to evaluate all our projects when we are trying to put in a budget onto that project. Now, one thing which becomes very critical also, Ms. Jha, is how you get the people involved. And that is a very critical component when you are running a city administration. And people can, oscillate from absolute disregard to environment to an absolute, focus on the environment. And I'll give you quick examples. Everyone's bothered about air quality. No one's bothered about that I am driving vehicle. How many of us traveled by cycle today? I don't know. Public transport? Anyone? A lot of hands. So I think we have a good crowd in TERI. But the same question asked in a lot of such discussions, you would rarely find people traveling by public transport. So when you talk to people, they would oscillate from the city is doing nothing about air pollution to what is my responsibility. That is absolutely not clear. We as a city have been investing almost about 250 to 300 crore every year in non-motorized transport. And there's a daily battle that I'm fighting with my media, with other people, where they say, where are the cyclists? Where are the people walking on the pedestrian walkways? Why are you spending so much money? Why are you not spending money on building roads, building other things, etc., etc.? And it's a give and take. But from the policymaker's point of view, from the city administrator point of view, I think we need to drive these solutions, sometimes with a bit of a wrong word to be used in a democracy, but a bit of a brute force, taking people along, because at some point of time you need to keep hitting the message, and we've been successful in trying to say about the non-motorized transport. There's a larger chunk of the people who are now aware that a pedestrian walkway, a cycling track, which is safe, good enough for people to walk, senior citizens, kids, is a much better thing in the long run. Same holds true for public transport. So when we're talking about resilience, I think infra, from a city point of view, I think it's very critical. Again, capacity building part, absolutely spot on, and not just capacity building of officers. Mr. Seth was absolutely correct on what happens in state government capitals versus what happens in the cities, but also we need to start thinking about capacity building of the political representatives, of the city councillors, of the mayors, of the standing committee chairmen, etc., to try and introduce things like that. If you ask fellow commissioners from many other cities, or especially small cities, people will not even be aware about a lot of the topics that we are discussing today. So I think it's an open conversation, but in terms of also, and just one final point maybe, we also need to set up a matrix in which people understand the incentive and disincentive of a disaster resilient infra. Currently, we don't have that matrix ready for me. So for example, if I'm spending 10 crore rupees in an STP, and this, I come back again to the life cycle cost analysis, I don't know if I invest in it, what is the advantage? If I don't invest, what is going to be the disadvantage? Quick short example of data that I was reading somewhere. If you have a water source and if you increase your afforestation on the upper reaches by about 10% only, your water cost reduction of the treatment reduces by 20% because siltation is lesser, it takes less. So I think all these concepts need to start coming in. Policy would be very, very critical from the government of India level, government of the state level, and also at the city level also. But I think we as city are moving in very sure-footed way, where we're trying to analyze our entire infra. If you ask me as a city, what is my disaster? My first foremost disaster is flooding. And just final thing I will tell you, recently we conducted a survey of all our streams and nalas, and it's a horrible situation, even in PCMC. And if you look at the streams and nalas that are existing in our cities, I think most nalas have been encroached upon. We have houses where houses have been built on nalas, but we've taken a no-nonsense approach going forward. We are widening our nalas, we are widening our streams, we are demolishing all those structures and restoring back those streams so that the urban flooding part reduces. So I think all cities are facing that, but only one final thing, the grind outside is much different than what we discuss here, but it is very, very critical to keep hitting that point on a much larger audience, which can take the agenda forward.
But we are glad at least the change has begun to happen. There is awareness, and you've been fortunate to win public trust, because when we talk about changing mindset, something that Mr. Sanjay spoke about, it's extremely important. Mr. Muzumdar, I'll now bring you into the discussion. Let's now move from sustainable urban mobility to sustainable buildings, which is again critical in building resilience for people as well as economies worldwide. Johnson Controls, your website says, is a world leader in smart buildings, creating safe, healthy and sustainable spaces. I also heard you speak last evening at the dinner about the 140-year legacy that you bring in making buildings better. The question is, how are you now transforming them into smart, healthy and sustainable buildings through technological solutions? We can't leave out technology in this age and time when we are talking about addressing this challenge.
Thank you so much. I think the common theme in the discussion today is double-clicking on the action. And I think there is a need to have a 360-degree approach in terms of how we are measuring our actions. Let me say, from an organization which is involved in technological developments, cooling, as I said, in buildings contributes to a great portion of emissions. And I was mentioning this yesterday. 50% of the energy we consume in buildings is actually coming from the cooling and the heating space. Now, what are those machines used in cooling? I mean, the biggest machine is chiller. Now, if you double click on why a chiller consumes more energy, then you will understand that bearings used in chillers have friction in it. Now, they use ball bearings, they use roller bearings, and they have had other kinds of bearings as well. Now, for a private organization, our research and development, our 360-degree action starts with that research and development. Now, what if we are able to find a solution to avoid friction in the bearings itself, right? And then you would come back and say that there is a concept called magnetic levitation. Now, if you use magnetic levitation bearings, the energy consumption in chillers comes down drastically. That is, if it comes down to the extent of 25 to 30%. Now, that's a technological example of how you double click and then say, there is this technological intervention that can be done. Go down the line. I think we have already seen all of us saying that it's important to measure actions, right? In terms of, if you don't measure it, then you don't improve it, right? Now, issue we have here is not measuring that. We have seen the Energy Conservation Amendment Act, which basically says that any building that has got 100 kilowatt more than connected load is required to have energy conservation measures in it. Now, we are not measuring that as simplistically speaking. So there are digital interventions that are required in terms of identifying what building contributes to where, how much, and how it should be reduced. There is a need for regulation, and there is a technological intervention. Does the technology exist? The answer is yes. Is it deployed? Not much. So I think we clearly need to double click on how we can go back to this and start deploying or measuring this. Now, when you think about actions, R&D, and then you come to the business-to-business partnerships, and I know one company can solve all the problems. It's important for businesses to partner with businesses. And in one such initiative, Johnson Controls partnered with the Mahindra Group in terms of educating or bringing awareness on how you can actually drive down energy consumption in buildings. This is called the Net Zero Buildings Initiative. You could Google it and you'll find more information about it. The intention there is to bring all under one umbrella. You talk about regulations, you talk about the best practices in the industry. Most importantly, you talk about what technological interventions can be done and how this can be sustained over a period of time. So that's on the B2B partnership. Now, the B2G partnership, and once again double clicking on the action, and I'll say at the policy level, I think India is doing a decent job at the center. Now, I think we have come out with some decent policies. We have got energy conservation building codes. It's now going to be energy conservation and sustainability building code. I think we've got EC Acts. We've got the Bureau of Energy Efficiency now working on advanced policies again. And we have had, once again, the privilege of working with some of these ministries in terms of addressing the finance piece of it. I think I think Dr. Karki spoke about upfront capital investments. Now, what if upfront capital investments can be completely avoided basis the savings that an intervention will generate? Now, if you have a savings, that can be generated, you can actually take away the investments, and that's a great win-win for everyone, right? Win for the user, win for the contractor, and win for the world, the earth itself. So the B2G engagements, to my satisfaction, is okay, in the sense that I think we are doing well at the central level, and at the state level, I think that's where I think we are severely challenged in terms of what capacities we have. I don't think we have, and I'm being very honest with this, I don't think we have great understanding of how these codes need to be deployed in cities. Now, cities, for all you know, contribute to 60% of the emissions that we have today, right? Now, we need to have that capacity building. That's where I think the industry and the government partnerships will form together. Most importantly, and I underline this, the industries, academia, think tanks, and the government will have to come together on this. Now, the initiatives that we have with IIT Madras, now with TERI, partnering with this, I think this needs to be developed, and we need to all focus on double-clicking on those actions, as I say. So those are my thoughts there, Teena, on buildings.
See, since your core area is also sustainable buildings, what is your perspective on the challenges that India faces in implementation of green buildings? Also, how is TERI addressing these challenges? We spoke about, in fact, all the other panelists have spoken at length about the need to accelerate action. So towards accelerating action, which is the need of the hour, help us and members in the audience understand the kind of efforts that TERI is undertaking.
Thanks, Teena, for that question. And it's always difficult to come at the last because you're almost summing up what everyone has said. But I would still like to, say a few things on what the experience has been so far as a regulator is concerned, because I've worked with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency also, and I've worked on the implementation side also. So, we all know that, as you've also said in your introductory remarks, that India is urbanizing at a very, very fast pace. And in the next 30, 40 years, we will see that a lot of our rural population will be living out of the urban spaces in search of livelihood, in search of comforts, food, and I think a lot of it is happening already. So what is happening in terms of buildings is that, we have codes and standards on one side where we have the Energy Conservation Building Code, which was launched in 2007, and after that, most of the states have adopted it. And not only the Conservation Code, I think if you look at it from point of view of renewables also, I think a lot of push from the Ministry of New and Renewable also to give a greater push to adopting renewables in the residential as well as commercial buildings. Similarly, it goes for waste, air, and how we are managing our sites. So, codes and standards are still sorted because, this is the work that, will give a lot of impetus to, the work that happens in the state. But most of the implementation, as you all have heard, that it happens at the state level. And, that is where, we need very robust regulatory mechanisms where, of course, GRIHA is doing its bit, by implementing the GRIHA code, where we have embedded most of these codes and standards into our ratings. But I think one of the challenge what we have always seen while implementation in the states is that, the state lack that infrastructure or the capacity to, build that kind of capacity in the state. So I think that is supported to some extent by, these a concept called the energy conservation building cells, and the way the capacities are getting built. But I still feel that there are two kind of professionals that definitely need an upgrade. One is, of course, the existing cadre where, we will have to really work very extensively with the state government departments, with the agencies that are working, with the existing architects, with the existing consultants that are already there. But then there is another set of cadre that is still, the future cadre, that is where, the focus has to be even more. And that is where even GRIHA is focusing, and, we are working very extensively with Council of Architecture and, the colleges, we are signing up with them, and we are ensuring that, whatever, we could do in, ensuring that their curricula could be enhanced, and also ensuring that their capacities are built by the time, they are future-ready professionals. That is another area that, will need a lot of impetus from the government. Second, of course, the discussion around that, green buildings cost more. So, this has been going on for quite some time, but, we also have to see that this can also come down by the kind of information that we provide in the public domain, which means that it is not only the kind of work that we do, the kind of case studies that we produce, because there's a lot of work that has already happened. So I think we need to go out, the government will have to put out a lot of work in the public domain, because buildings are different from appliances. It is very easy to measure efficiencies at appliance level, but when it comes to buildings, there are very few measuring, monitoring mechanisms, and I feel that, we have been lacking in developing these frameworks over years, and we have always believed in the work that we have done in the Sustainable Buildings Group that, measuring and, evaluating the processes at each level is something that is extremely critical to the process of sustainability. So as a philosophy of GRIHA is that what gets measured gets managed is something will have to be followed at all levels. The third, I think the next point, which is of course another link to this whole jigsaw puzzle, is also the information on materials and how technologies have come up, and you've touched upon how chillers and how technologies can of course be that plug-in. I think a very important point raised by Pimpri Chinchwad is on the LCA. We have for a very long time been talking only on the operational side of energy, and we have always looked at it from active measures. But what about looking at it from the passive side, and how the designs and how we can look at it from the material side? So the lack of information on materials and how designs, they play a very critical role in bringing down the initial cost of construction and ensuring that the green buildings can be built in a cost which is affordable, is something that will have to also be looked at very seriously now. And I think GRIHA has already made that first step of building that concepts of LC and LCC in its rating. And through our research work as well as at TERI, we are also looking at developing further on, the developing comforts, because affordability is also linked to how we are going to be looking at future houses, how the future houses are going to be built in. So I think we also have to look at, the communities, the vulnerable communities that we have never touched upon, that, how do you make sustainability reach that level as well? So, we will have to look at the entire spectrum of stakeholders, when we are looking at sustainability, and that is how, we can look at the next 30, 40 years of this industry to be more sustainable and green. Thank you, I'll stop at that.
You're right, so that sums up the first round. We now understand the gravity of the challenges, but hope is the biggest hope, it said. What's come out of round one is there is urgent need to accelerate action. There will be collective action required through partnerships, through collaborations. How will that happen is what we will discuss in the second round. I'll begin with Mr. Prothi once again. We understand that CDRI is working at multiple levels to strengthen global efforts towards building resilience in infrastructure. But when we say accelerating action, it can't be in every area. We have to identify the most important steps. What, according to you, are the most urgent next steps for the CDRI in this direction? At the same time, if I can also ask you a question on the next biennial report, because the last one was in 2023. This year, we expect by the end of the year, the other report to come in. How will that build up on the first one? The first one, you made visible the concept of resilience dividend to the world. How will the second one build up on that report?
Thank you so much. And this is such a rich discussion, and there is so much I want to react to, but it's always difficult to keep your points very clear. So maybe, the way CDRI is trying to approach these problems is to say, what are the fundamental challenges we need to think about? Data is one, right? So I'll come to data in a minute. The other one is we're talking about infrastructure. So what is critical infrastructure? The third part is the capacity building. So, for us, always it is about how are we pushing the boundaries on any of these things. I'll give you an example on urban as a sector, right? So we are also conscious that risks are different in different geographies. So the way we are framing our programs is a geographic focused I'll give an urban this thing. So see, we have understood, when you look at climate change, the two biggest challenges that cities are facing around the world, and particularly in low and middle income countries, is flooding, and extreme heat is becoming a problem, right? Now, how does an organization such as CDRI, which is doing, it's a coalition, so coalition brings together examples. Coalition brings together an opportunity to share, learn, innovate. So we actually created a program for urban focusing particularly on these two challenges and invited cities. We've received about 87 proposals from around the world, from Brazil, from different, about 10 from India as well. Of course, we won't support all of them. We don't have that much money. That's where partnerships become important. But we're actually coming up with the best proposals that are pushing the boundaries on how do you look at flooding from a different point of view. You said the nalas across our cities are terrible. At the same time, there is a need to think beyond the city. Your same point on 10% of reforestation up, right? Making the argument for those kinds of innovative solutions, which are actually also cost effective. You look at coastal cities, and one clear example on the coast is if you need coastal protection, what is the infrastructure choice you will make? Will you make a choice of hard infrastructure, which is going to be costly and will degrade over time? Or will you make a choice of mangroves or other solutions which will actually get enhanced over time and which are actually much more cost effective? So giving those kinds of ammunition to the decision makers to then say, tomorrow when there is a flooding problem they're having to address, what are those examples that they can actually reach out to say, you know what, try this city. And India, the good thing is we are actually finding now innovation happening. Similarly for us, we're finding innovation happening in other parts of our coalition members and saying, how do we bring that knowledge together for capacity? On data, which also ties to the second biennial report. The first report, we needed a way to understand how across the coalition there is a basic comparative understanding of risk. So we built this entire global database. We spent a lot of money. We bought the best modelers in the world. It's probabilistic risk modeling. It doesn't exist. We are actually the first in the world, I can proudly say that, which have built this model which is in the public domain, where at a country level you can understand risk. It's not at a city level, it's not at a state level. So the next version we're saying we're going to downgrade some of this in some countries where there is an interest, several countries have said we want to now. The first one was intended for an advocacy purpose. So as you just pointed, those numbers are for advocacy. But then how do you actually design your infrastructure with better modeling? How do you get data, which is very difficult? We all who are working, who've been professionals for a long time know. It is impossible to get data, even if it exists. So as a coalition, we're trying to build a database that's in the public domain on risk. The second biennial report will go much deeper on how do you start to use probabilistic risk modeling for different kinds of infrastructure decisions. The critical infrastructure side, we are looking at power, we're looking at telecommunication, we're looking at transportation. So we did a study, I'll just give an example of the coast of Odisha, where we try to understand how will cyclonic patterns in the future affect your electricity grid, your transmission and distribution system, along a 60-kilometer coastline of Odisha. It's a very, very thorough, detailed study. We've given the state recommendations to say, you have A, B, C options based on a much more nuanced understanding of your risk, much more nuanced understanding of, there are certain areas where the damage to infrastructure is much more the vulnerability angle. If your electricity system is providing electricity to the state, it's not, all your users are not the same kinds of users. Your hospitals may need electricity, others. So how do you come up with that metrics of saying, where is my vulnerability more important so that I can use my resources more carefully to say, if I'm building the STP, if flood is a key risk, I cannot avoid because of other reasons. How do I make sure my electricity system is working so that STP can work, so that so these linkages we are trying to also demonstrate to come in through certain kinds of frameworks that become scalable and replicable. So that's where we are today. I mean, there's lots more going on, but I'll stop there.
at the end of the year, but Dr. Sanjay said, when we say accelerating action, and in the context of, yes, in the context of the problems that India faces, countries in the global south face, local solutions work the best to our problems. We've seen how when challenges have been posed to us, we worked our way out through different innovations, especially during the COVID times. Nobody believed what India could do, but we did the unthinkable. Let's take this positivity and the optimism that prevails in the country right now in terms of not just working for the development of Indians, but also working on the principle of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We've become a voice of the global south. We are trying to strengthen global partnerships. The CDRI is one example of that effort that India is undertaking. At a time when we are seeing one part of the world in a situation of fatigue towards addressing sustainability issues, one part which is most impacted, how do you see India building and assuming a leadership role in a more proactive way to address the challenges that not just we face as a country, but also taking along the global south?
So, I think we are doing pretty well as far as putting our focus on how we go about creating the infrastructure that we are putting in place. We're not consumptive as the Western society. We are doing things right. We're learning from them what they have done wrong and not go on the pathways that they necessarily adopted. One of the, and where, communities, I think the Mission Life, if you look at the initiative of the Government of India by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, really brings that out so well. It tells us, brings us back to our ancient practices as to how we make sure that we, involve or we take on the principles of frugality when we when we go ahead with our developmental process, and not at the cost of the environment. We don't do things which are at the cost of the environment. A balance that needs to be struck. Not saying that development should stop. It is very important, and it's also an important measure of economic growth. So obviously all of these things are there. Now, one of the things which I think become very important, which we've done well, as far as if Santhosh talked about technologies and energy efficiency improvements and all of that, we've all had at some stage. I've also had the privilege of working with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and one of the things which we did right was we empowered the consumer to take decisions, right? And that really helped to transform the markets. I think, and that's where, even if you look at the urban living labs that I talked about, it's essentially empowering the end user. You need to give that power, decision-making power to the end consumer. Involve them right now to tell them that, look, this is not something which is top-down. Everything in it is for you. You are eventually going to benefit. If it is lower energy bills, you are going to benefit from it. If you are going to live in better, healthier environments, you are going to benefit from it. It's not that the government is going to benefit from it. And that is where I think we are missing out on the big picture. We need to empower the end consumer. And I'm telling you this, that if you want green buildings to make a transformative, if you want green buildings to take the scales that one is aspiring to, provide that power to the end consumer. Let them start demanding for that. I'm going to ask for a green building. Right now, it's a very, very distorted messaging that is there in the market. The developers are only looking at speed and scale, nothing else. They are only looking at speed. What is it that they are going to benefit? Where is it? And then the narrative is wrong, that green costs more. No, it's wrong. It doesn't cost more. If you do it at the initial stages, it is going to be very cheap. It's not going to give me an additional, no delta in it at all, right? So this is where we need to, the mindset changes. I think all of us here have spoken. We have the municipal commissioner here. What better a person on the dais than a commissioner of a municipality? I'm telling you this, and I know it for a fact. I know how he is surviving, because every day his priorities, it's firefighting for him because his priorities keep changing on a daily basis. The grind that he talked about, we understand that very well. I look at Visakhapatnam. Visakhapatnam, I saw during the course of 2 years that we are doing the pull project, the 4 municipal commissioners have changed. But I'm glad that the municipal commissioners, the leadership that they brought, they were on the same page. So nothing got distorted and we continue to deliver, right? So those are all things which really matter. I mean, now for him, if somebody starts telling him that, listen, today you forget about water supply and sewage and waste and street lighting and start looking at resilience and put these on the bottom end of the priorities, I don't think so that he would be able to survive there for another day. So he has to keep, it's a firefighting for him. So I think empowering the end user, bringing them on onto the main, into the mainstream, and in all the decision-making process will help. We have policies, we have all those conducive environments to make sure that we succeed, but it's the mindset change and bringing the communities together. Yeah, so I think that's very important.
Right, okay,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Singh, you gave us the current picture of the problems that lie, but the little areas in which change has begun to happen, which includes at the policy level, which includes in the mindsets, which includes community engagement. If we talk about way forward, you recently released the Vision 50, if I'm not wrong, for the city. How does it lay the pathway towards a sustainable future, if you could share with us? And how does it incorporate also the idea of accelerating action to achieve the desired goal?
So Vision 50 is something that we're doing. Our city turns 50 in 2032. So we are trying to set up a vision of how people envisage the city as. So how does a city resident feel that how my city should be in 2032? And what the practitioners, the stakeholders, the civil society, etc., how we can bring them together to create that vision and also move towards that accelerating the action that you're talking about. Now, in a city, I'll quickly just maybe summarize as well. We're running out of time also. One of the things that I'm a firm believer in, as Mr. Seth was just mentioning, I think we need to prepare frameworks. Frameworks at the federal level, Government of India, below to the state level and down to the cities, which force actions. And sorry to use the word, but sometimes you have to force those actions through incentive and disincentive model, where there's no choice. For example, a private project which is above 20,000 square meter, it's compulsory that you need to take an environment clearance. It goes without saying. There's no project in my city happening above 20,000 square meter which goes without that. What if we begin to include the entire concept of disaster resilience into it? If you look at even private projects, we have cases where flooding is happening into the basement parkings. And there are societies which have put their generators in basement. There are societies which have put their STPs in basements, something that we should have looked into more carefully. But we need to start analyzing even private, sector investment and private sector infrastructure from that point of view, not just the government sector infra. But if we create the frameworks right, I think we would be able to do the job. Second and final point is about investment, is about financing. There is financing available. Everyone's been saying that, and it's a fact that it's available, but it's difficult to dip into. And I don't know where it is floating because we have not been able to dip into it much. Last year, we issued a municipal bond of 200 crore for our river rejuvenation project. We are again coming out with a green bond just this month only, a 200 crore for our non-motorized transport. But the kind of yield that Mr. Ganguly was talking about in terms of a markup or a markdown on the yield that I'm getting, I still don't see that happening in the green areas, in the sustainable or the green bond, etc. So the incentive to really come out with a green bond reduces by the day. But if we are able to somehow match that up where the multilateral banks, etc., can pitch in that sort of a markdown on the yield that they would otherwise think, I think maybe we might be able to tie those dots together. But I think if we have the frameworks ready, and again going back, it's a very trite and run-of-the-mill point about capacity building. Mr. Prothi has been pushing it. I again feel that it is very important to keep reiterating that, but capacity building at all levels.
Right.
From political to bureaucratic and bureaucratic down. One of the reasons why PCMC has been able to do good in terms of cities is that our institutional capacity is very good. So my HODs, right from my mobility department to environment department, they have carried forward various initiatives year on year, because no matter the commissioner changes, the core team understands the value of those entire things, and I think that becomes very critical.
Okay, we're running out of time, but we'll try and cover all the other panelists very quickly. Dr. Karki, coming to you, since we are talking about the way forward, Nepal too has come up with a new framework with regard to the urban policy. How does the new policy tick the right boxes in terms of the desired action towards sustainability? If you could share with us the roadmap that it lays down to address sustainability and building resilience.
Okay, so I think I would like to change your question a little bit, because I want to connect to what I said before. And this is, I'm going beyond Nepal. As all of you know, that we have, of course, infrastructure deficit, but we also have resilience deficit, and we have several other deficits. So I will come to the Nepal's case of our policy later. But I think if all of you know that we have Rio Convention, we have Climate Convention, Bahadur Convention, and we have Desertification Convention, and then we have Sendai Framework. If the estimates of all the convention, if to do what they have decided to do to meet all the goals, they require financing more than $4 trillion. So that's never going to be happen, because I think at the current geopolitical situation, the finance would be the biggest, I think, the challenge for doing this resilience, infrastructure resilience dividend. So we have to find alternative, and that is nature-based solutions. Okay, that applies to all sectors. And yesterday there was discussion on nature-based solution. And just to put in a very simple language, it's using the power of nature's contribution to people or nature and the ecosystem to build resilience, but build resilience in such a way that that makes resilient infrastructure, but also strengthens communities and strengthens environment. So that is most important. So I would like to, and then they estimate the current deficit in doing the nature-based solution oriented finance is around $600 billion. So you can see the difference between the two. So we have to go for a hybrid model. You talk about the green building and green infrastructure. So the hybrid model, right now the constraints are that we have more policy and institutional control, I would say. First of all, many countries, although yesterday also I think we heard that the ADB had $2 billion set aside for NBS, but that remains sort of unutilized. So that means there is no attraction. There is no attraction because we don't have the right kind of institutional and regulatory framework, the first of all. We have not mandated NBS in, let's say, in building codes or in our infrastructure design. I think that we are designing infrastructure just to do function what they should be doing. We are not doing designing infrastructure to also benefit the society and the environment. So this is the mindset which needs to change. And then I would say the second is that we have to also think of very innovative finance. We have a financial gap. So we have blended finance, public-private. We also have bundled finance. But we need to leverage these two finances innovatively so that we can meet the financial gaps. At the same time, of course, we have capacity gaps. I've talked about institutional capacity. We actually need three types of capacity. We need technological capacity, we need institutional capacity, we also need systemic capacity. That system, we have to understand. When we are going to whole society, whole, I would say government models, then you have to understand all the different regulation policy, how they can be harmonized. And of course, we have the community participation. They have to be always, their engagement makes actually the system more resilient. Now talking about Nepal's case, Nepal suffered a huge earthquake in 2015. So we have several models. I think some of the international organization has been involved. We have resilient school building. And all the building codes after the earthquake have been revised to make them more earthquake resilient. But as I said, we have a multidimensional vulnerability. So we have to really prepare our buildings, our roads, our drinking waters, our irrigation systems, and our hydroelectrical infrastructure resilient to earthquake, resilient to climate change, because we are one of the most vulnerable countries. So, and most of the, by saying that, I'm saying it applies to most of all the Himalayan regions, because we have so much investment and more are coming in hydroelectrical power, because we have to reach our net zero ambition, and that can be possible only through hydro and solar. So we have to think of resilient infrastructure in a really holistic manner. So we have to first integrate. We have to of course do this innovative financing, but we have to also have a very public-private sector partnership. For example, I think in the hydroelectricity sector, we have a concept which really works. It's called payment for ecosystem services. But we haven't got the private sector pay for the ecosystem resilience or biodiversity conservation. So at the end of the day, how do you see the amount of electricity price you pay? Part of that goes back to revitalizing the nature. So that is the concept we need to broaden. I would say our urban systems, they are very vulnerable. Of course, we have a huge, Kathmandu, I think, is one of the fastest growing cities in South Asia. There are no design, but I think for mountain terrain, I think we need to have what we call urban ecosystem based planning, so that we really think how ecosystem can protect people and also environment.
Okay, the timer has done its job. We're being told to wrap up. So if the organizers allow, can I take a minute each for the concluding remarks for the remaining speakers, starting with you, Mr. Ganguly. Finance will always remain a big constraint. The demand is in trillions. What is being committed is only in billions. So that can never be addressed. That gap it's difficult to bridge. But if we explore alternative solutions, especially in context of the regions that you've worked in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, what are the key enablers that you can think of?
So I'll talk about just in the paucity of time, and we're working right now to create a very simple checklist for Indian cities. First, it's being piloted in Indian cities, so that when designing infrastructure assets like a water treatment plant or a sewage treatment plant, how do we integrate resilience and mitigation measures in it so that these projects can become eligible for climate finance? So we understand that India doesn't have a taxonomy yet, it's being developed, but we have global taxonomies, global frameworks. So how can cities then design projects that, Mr. Shekhar Singh spoke about a green bond. Eventually, if he has ambitions to raise money to finance resilience projects, to finance mitigation projects in a city, our checklist that we are developing will help him at the design stage, at the DPR stage. He can give it to the DPR consultant, say that these features should be there so that it becomes eligible for climate finance. So that's one enabler that we are working on right now. I'll stop.
Your concluding remarks, and especially if I could ask you about the role of technologies like AI, IoT in helping us build resilience in infrastructure. AI is everywhere. I'm sure all of us want to hear from you about the role of these emerging technologies.
I'll respect the time here. I just want to conclude in 2 sentences and say sustainability is not cost plus. It actually helps you save money. Now, there are a number of case studies we have where IT companies, data centers, hotels, they were paying 100 rupees, let's say, as electricity bill. Through technological interventions, they have been able to reduce it down to 50 rupees, which means that 50 rupees is going back into capital for more investments. You are able to generate capital just by having those. As far as AI is concerned, I think the biggest challenge we have is we continue to operate our technological systems discretely as this is one system, this is one system. We are not looking at how to bring them together. And there are technologies available today to sort of fine-tune this. I think that's where we need to go.
Ms. Basi, wrap up the show for us.
I think, yes, I think most of it is covered, but definitely apart from the having robust regulatory mechanisms. I think what we have always been promoting and been discussing, that use of locally available materials and pushing sustainability through designs is something that has not been happening for a very long time. That we need very research focused outcomes and also very research based case studies where states can start adopting it at a large scale. Of course, we need performance dashboards. We will have to talk about how we can manage or measure these sustainability impacts at various levels, at the government level, at the the levels where designing is happening, at where the measurement is happening. All these things need to be put in a very, very robust way. And lastly, of course, we will have to also look at how financial institutes and the banks are also reaching out to the end users. I think we need to be giving more information at that level so that they can make these concepts more simpler and acceptable to the end user, and that is how we can create that transformation. So I'll keep it very short, and thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so with that, we'll have to wrap up this session. Thank you once again to our distinguished speakers, and to members in the audience, please accept my apology. We will not be able to open the floor for questions because it's a very difficult task as a moderator when you have a panel as esteemed as this to wrap up the conversation and still have time for question and answers. I'm sure you'll have some time over lunch. You can catch hold of these members and speak your mind out. But thank you once again for your patient hearing, and thank you for such an insightful conversation. Thank you.
I think, Teena, thank you so much for the great moderation. Thank you.
I would like to thank our panelists today for shedding light on action and solutions for resilient and equitable infrastructure for young peoples and the nation's sustainable future. I request all of them to come forward for a good group picture, and I request our audience to please give them a warm applause to end today's session. Before we disperse for tea, I encourage our participants today to share your experience on social media using our official hashtags to help amplify and participate in the discussion further. Next, we have a session on Ideas Forum on the Green Leap through Technology and Innovation coming up next at Stein at noon. Thank you everybody for joining us today.